Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Way is in Training. This is a podcast exploring how warriors should train and fight, as well as how they should live. We will talk about technique, but we'll also dive deep into fitness, mindset, and strategy. We will explore leadership and philosophy as well. So whether you are a young soldier, a veteran police officer, a responsible armed citizen, or simply someone looking for an authentic life, let's examine how the lessons of combat and preparation for it can help us fulfill our potential. Let's explore the way together and learn how the discipline of training can show us our true selves amidst the chaos of life.
Hey everybody, welcome back. In this episode, I've got Melody. There goes the anchor man. All right, let me try that again. Take two. Hey everybody, welcome back. In this episode, I've got Melody Lauer, firearms trainer, and a pretty big name in this defensive shooting industry, actually. We first met at a defensive shooting conference put on by concealedcarry.com. And I'm looking forward to having her on the show and kind of seeing her perspective on how to train and the ways training has improved her life and her students' lives in general. So real quick, why don't you let everybody know a little bit about yourself, Melody, like how you came into this line of work and what your background is?
Sure. I'm the owner of Citizens Defense Research, but obviously did not start there. My path started as innocently as you can, I guess, think of it. My husband was in the military, and I was actually, when we got married, I was too young to even purchase a firearm, much less carry one. But he wanted me to consider getting my carry permit. For when he was gone, he would just feel better with that. And I was like, I'll think about it because I still have some time before I can even do that. And I came up with a couple of conditions after thinking about it pretty hard. I was like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I knew that having a gun does not automatically mean you know how to shoot a gun, right? So I was like, I want professional training that isn't you. I want continued education. I want to be able to check in on my education every once in a while, make sure that I am keeping these skills relevant. I want to be able to practice on a regular basis, and I want to be able to choose my own gun. Like, I don't want to be one of these things where it's like, oh, honey, here, buy and carry this gun. And I was like, if that sounds reasonable to you, then I'll consider getting my carry permit. And he was like, that sounds perfect. Like that's the best thing that you could ever hear. And so I started down that path. I went and got professional training. I started practicing on a regular basis at a local range. Turns out I did not even realize it at the time. That's not very usual. That's not what people decide to do. And after I was practicing every week for months, the range there offered me a job. And I was like, yeah, but I don't really know anything. And they're like, don't worry, we'll train you. Now, anybody who's been in the gun industry for any length of time is like, oh no, because let's face it, most gun stores, most gun places aren't actually that great, right? But I really lucked out. I had a fantastic, knowledgeable crew of people who took me under their wing. They taught me about firearms just in general. We also had an indoor range there. I could not help on the range until I had my NRA instructor certification. So they helped me get that. And I started assisting on the range. I started competing. We had kind of like a little IDPA style match there, started competing there. And I just continued to keep training and keep practicing and keep doing all the things that I said I was going to do. And before long, it was just one thing after another. I kept going and kept training and that kind of led me to where I am and interfacing with some really amazing people who helped me find even more options and started training myself. And 17 years later, here I am.
It's interesting to me, kind of the way you articulated your journey there, because that should be the common experience for people that carry concealed, but it's actually so rare that's how it shakes out. And I'm trying to be less judgmental in my old age. There was a time when I would have dismissed people that didn't do it the way you did it as just being completely incorrect, right? And now that I'm getting older, I realize that while it may not be optimal, they still have the right to have something to defend themselves. as long as they're safe, as long as,
I agree.
they're not endangering other people unnecessarily. So I try not to be as harsh as I used to be and as arrogant, honestly, as I used to be about it. But it's funny to me because your story, in a way, kind of mirrors my wife's. You've met Angela. She was with me
Mhm.
at the conference helping out. But she started before we were together. We actually got together because she was training. And that's how we met. But she did all the same things you're talking about so that she could learn on her own as a single woman living in Chicagoland. And once again, neither one of you, unfortunately, is typical of most gun owners, and I've always kind of looked at it as almost like it's a martial art. I mean, it really should be
Oh,
looked
it
at
is.
that way, and I think that that is definitely not the prevailing opinion, even among people who train.
Mhm.
They somehow think that it's somehow something different than learning to fight, but it's still learning to fight. You're just
Mhm.
learning to use a tool to fight.
And I couldn't tell you because what's funny about that is it never occurred to me that people would choose anything else because I was not in the gun industry. I was not surrounded by gun people, right? I did not know the typical progression. I just knew, well, there has to be classes about this stuff. Like there has to be, and I know that I'm not good at this because I've never really done it before. I mean, I grew up with firearms, but I was not in a handgun carry culture.
Right.
And so I was like, well, I really don't know what I'm doing. There has to be classes, but for something as serious, because I was thinking about it, I'm like, this is really serious. Like we are talking about carrying a lethal weapon on our
It's
person out and
literally life
about.
or death. It's life
Yeah,
or death for
exactly. It
you or
is
for someone else.
100%. And I was like, I don't want to just assume that because I had one class, I now know everything that there is to know. And because and I'm like, I don't even know how I'm going to do in that class. Right. And to be completely honest with you, the first time I went out shooting, it was a fixed range, right? It was like an outdoor fixed range. And I think the closest handgun stalls were, I think, 15 yards. I was hitting the ground. I didn't even hit so I was very aware of how absolutely terrible I was. And I was very frustrated by that. And I was very afraid of it because I'm like, oh, what? Like, if I actually need to use a firearm, I'm not ready. I can't even hit a piece of plywood at 15 yards. And that was very alarming for me. And it was very scary for me. And I'm like, I am not going to carry this until I feel really ready. And we can have a big, long conversation about what it means to be ready to carry a firearm, because I think that's different for everybody, with some caveats. And I did start carrying pretty quickly after I got my permit, because at the state I lived in at the time, there was no training requirement. You could just go as long as you passed the background check, you got your permit to carry. I did start carrying to get comfortable with it, but I was very, very aware of how bad of a shot I was. You know what I mean? I was very aware of how poor my skills were. And I wanted to have confidence in my skill. I wanted to know that if I actually were called upon to use it, that I would have confidence that I could hit what I aimed at, and then be able to then led into, well, how do I know I'm going to make a good use of force decision? Just because I can hit what I'm aiming at doesn't mean that thing needs to be hit. And that led me down an entirely different branch of training, that I'm very grateful for as well.
And that's another thing that I think is important. And I've been doing a lot of thinking about this lately, had a lot of conversations about it, because I think so. To some small degree, I was one of the people that helped get competitive shooting more popular among like law enforcement circles and defensive shooting circles. I'm by no means the most influential one, but I had a small role to play in it, right? And the thing that's been troubling me the last year or so is that while I think we succeeded in showing the value in competition for making you better at shooting, we almost went to where the culture's gone too far in that direction. And I don't mean that competition is never a bad thing for skill. That's not what I'm saying at all. Like, not even close, right? someone who competes seriously is going to be a better shooter than someone who's never competed, just without a doubt. It's
100%.
easily provable, right? But that's the equivalent of hitting a heavy bag in a speed bag for a fighter.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the sum total of the fight. And a lot of us, and I'm going to have been a bit guilty of this too, because we were fighting that whole competition will get you killed in the street cliche, right? So we became very fierce in how we fought it, and we started like downplaying the value of the other stuff, because honestly, if you can't shoot well enough, the other stuff doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that shooting well enough is the only part of the problem or will be enough. And
Mm-hmm.
people don't understand that both of those things can be true. It can be true that tactics and mindset and awareness do matter a great deal. And it can also be true that your hard shooting skills matter a great deal as well, and you're not going to be good without them. Both of those things can be true, but we live in this binary culture where it's either one or the other. And I think we've gone too far now. There are things that matter for the fight that you'll never do in a USPSA or an IDPA match,
Mm-hmm.
because you're shooting targets. And that doesn't mean that those matches aren't valuable. They're incredibly valuable, but you got to do the other stuff too. And I think we've gotten to where people, for a long time, defensive-minded shooters neglected the shooting skill, and they worked on the other stuff. Now we've gotten to where people are getting the shooting skill part really well done, and now we're neglecting the stuff we used to do. And you got to have
as human beings are so bad at yes and.
Yes.
We very are. I mean, we're really good at yes, but we're not very good at yes and.
And I think that's an important thing, right? And I'm glad you brought it up, because like that's the message I'm trying to get out now, is that you've got to have all of the skills.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's going to go to a fitness boxing class and step in the octagon and do well, right? There's more to it than just the ability to punch and kick, right?
I really think that the journey very much started. I am a fiercely curious individual, and I always have been my entire life. And what started every new iteration of whatever training journey that I began was always based in the question of, well, what happens if? And I was never satisfied with like the internet keyboard warrior answers, right? So for instance, great example is I was like, well, how do I know? I remember very shortly after I got my carry permit, I was kind of figuring out how to carry, where I'm carrying, am I carrying, behind a bolster, all that kind of stuff. I remember my husband and I were in our apartment at the time. We were newly married. And I was kind of like, well, how do I know if I have like time to draw? Right. Because I feel like if you're, like on top of me, right? Like if you grab me and you're a bad guy, would I even have time to draw? Would I not have time to draw? And then he was like, well, have you heard of the principle of like the Tueler drill? And I'm like, what's the Tueler drill? And he gave me the whole premise of the Tueler drill, 21 feet, all that kind of stuff. And I was like, that seems like a long distance. Like, I bet you I could, so we started having these kinds of like conversations, like, well, let's measure out 20 feet in the apartment and I'll come after you and you can see if you can, and so this fierce curiosity and this desire to prove to myself what I was capable of started a lot of fights. Started a lot of like, well, then if you don't know, then who do I talk to about this? And I remember my husband and I were kind of doing this like very, looking back at him like, oh, that was kind of dangerous, sort of force on force, and getting really frustrated because he was able to like take my gun away from me several times. And I was really, really angry about that. And he was like, well, what do you think could make a difference? I was like, I don't know. Maybe if I had a knife or something, that could be a better option than a gun in this particular scenario. And he's like, well, why don't you get a knife then? And I'm like, well, I don't have any training in knives. And he's like, well, there's a knife class over here. And I'm like, fine, I'll take this knife class. And so I went and took a knife class with the Tactical Defense Institute. And so like every single step along the way, it was like I'd run up against another question or another problem that I wanted to solve and be like, well, if I can't figure it out by doing kind of like this mock-up force on force kind of stuff, and then by golly, I'm going to go and find training that's going to answer this question for me. And I've been fortunate enough that I found a lot of amazing trainers, and we do. I mean, as you well know, the pool of trainers that we have access to is so deep and so vast, and we are honored to be amongst so many knowledgeable people who are so graciously willing to share their knowledge, yourself amongst them. So I have been exceptionally fortunate that I've been able to find all of the training that I could possibly want.
So a quick little anecdote about the Tooler drill. So when they did the video for the Tooler drill to demonstrate it and prove it, do you know who had the knife?
We know Masad told us about this because
Danny Inosanto. So Danny Inosanto was Bruce Lee's best friend and was a master Filipino martial artist, which meant he was a master knife fighter. But what a lot of people don't know is he was also a track star in college.
That would make sense.
Him sprinting 21 feet might be a little different than the normal person sprinting 21 feet. It's still a good drill and it's still a good rule of thumb. But I like throwing that out there because that's one thing people don't, it's the yes and, like you talked about.
Well, and wasn't it also supposed to be, I'm trying to remember, because I remember taking a class with Masad Ayub, and Masad Ayub, that was one of his things, like, the tool, it's not actually a drill. It's what is it? The Tooler principle or something?
Yes. Yeah. It's not actually
now
a drill.
people have made it into a drill, but truly it's like it's a principle. It's an idea. It's not meant to be a law.
And it's a rule of thumb. It's like a principle.
Yeah.
But
and
the other thing that's
most
interesting,
people call it a drill. Actually,
stepping off the line of attack increases your survivability exponentially in that same.
Oh, I believe that. Mm-hmm. Yep.
So that's another thing it's the yes and people don't talk about. But yeah, I love pointing out that Danny Inosanto was a track star, not just a martial artist. Because that makes it, you're kind of stacking the deck, which I actually have no problem with, because then you're you're making it the worst possible scenario.
And I would rather work back from that direction, right?
Yes.
And I think that's a principle that good instructors, good trainers have kind of in their mind is, all right, so if we, and I know Craig Douglas talks a lot about this, and other trainers, especially if you're doing things like force on force, if you're training people for the worst possible day of their lives where everything is going wrong, and then they have a real incident that doesn't last 10 minutes and have 4 different people, all with knives and guns, who are bigger and stronger and better than you, and you just end up with one person who's kind of, they're having a bad day and you're having a bad day, and it's over in 2 minutes instead of 10 minutes. You're like, oh, that wasn't nearly as bad as it was in training. And that's a good thing. Like, you want your training to be more difficult and more taxing and more stressful than the potential. That doesn't mean that all incidences go that way, of course, but if you can have your training be a step above what you're most likely to encounter, then your chances of dealing successfully with that encounter go up significantly.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that a lot of people stepping away from the good instructors, I'm talking about just the general state of people that carry a gun, who do practice, but maybe don't go to a bunch of classes or compete, right? And it's kind of human nature to kind of become complacent in the most likely. This is the most likely thing I will encounter. The 3 to 5 yards, 3 to 5 rounds, 3 to 5 seconds. So that's all I need to do until you're Dickens in the food court. I mean, it's all you need to do until it's not all you need to do. And just because that is the statistical mean does not mean that there aren't outliers. It's a bell curve for a reason. The ends of the bell curve still exist, right?
And I think that's completely fine as long as you are very honest about what you are prepared for. If you're like, okay, I only have so much time and so many resources that I can dedicate towards training, right? And so I'm going to train for the typical, right? But then when you have those outlier situations, you are very honest with yourself and be like, hey, I'm not John Wick, right? I'm not prepared for this. And so probably the best thing that I can do potentially to be helpful is maybe get out of the way. Now, I know who Chris Seipert is. Chris Seipert and I, he works with us at Citizens Defense Research. Um, you know, uh, Part of that is as well understanding your own nature. Like there is no planet on which a Chris Seipert type person is going to run away from gunfire, right? Like that's not how he is made. That's not how he came from the factory. He is a very high responder. He is likely, no matter what, to go running towards danger because that's who he is and that's who he's chosen to be. And that's kind of his ethos about who he thinks of himself as well. But knowing that about himself, he has taken it upon himself to make sure that he is trained to that level, right? Like if I know that I'm going to be the person who is running towards gunfire, then I owe it to myself and everyone that I am attempting to help to be as best trained as I can possibly be. So it's a combination of knowing yourself, but also knowing your limitations of training. I mean, if I'm 65 years old and have a bad hip and, and these compounding factors, maybe the best resources or the best investment in my time and resources is not to take a rifle class. But maybe I can do other things, whatever that may be, whether that's just taking care of my fitness or, putting more time and energy into home defense or like where I even live or choose to retire. All of those kinds of things can have a significant impact on everything that we're talking about as regards to, our potential for facing threats, dealing with them, how we deal with them. And I think to what you were talking about, people get very focused on one aspect of whether that's personal protection or safety or training. And I mean, our lives are holistic by nature, and everything that we do impacts the other things that we do. And changing any one variable can have a compounding impact, of course.
I got a couple thoughts on this that I think you might like. I'm going to bounce off you. So one is understanding your level of participation. I think that's kind of the key to what you were talking about a minute ago. I only have this much time and money and effort I can devote to this because I have all these other things in my life. What's a realistic set of goals for my skill level? What's a realistic thing that I can be prepared for? And I think that all too often, our level of participation does not equal our goals. They're not in balance.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what leads to a lot of people's inability to achieve their goals or frustration with how things are progressing. Because they're not, and you don't have to chase the dragon. You don't have to try to be, like you said, try to be John Wick, right? That's not essential. Nobody says you have to. But understand that if you're not putting in that amount of effort, you're not going to be. Don't have that goal without the commensurate level of participation, right? So I think that's a big factor. And also, so understanding the realities of your context as well, kind of what you were getting at, children in poor health, maybe you need to focus on that prior to, taking a performance shooting class, right?
Yeah.
And that's all okay. There's nothing wrong with any of that. Like where you are in your goals or where you are in your goals. It's not up to me to tell somebody what they need to do apart from safety and responsibility for other people.
I think one of the things, and you've probably seen this as well, though, the biggest issue is getting people to be honest with themselves about where they are, and what their actual goal is, and where that goal does fit into their lives. So perhaps you do have somebody who does want to be John Wick, right? They think it'd be cool. They think it'd be cool to do like the running and gunning thing. And they have this kind of fantasy in their head that just because they took a class or two, they are suddenly there, even though they've never drawn from the holster. They've never drawn, you know what I mean? They have this idea that because maybe they took a class and hit a few targets, they are already there. And then also matching up their supposed goal with like, well, where is this going to fit in with your life, right? And I have met people, and you've met people who they are high end competitive shooters, and they want to win the nationals. They want to win, some sort of thing, and they dedicate the time and the energy and effort to do that. One of the other individuals who works with me, Alex Clark, he spent 2 whole years just dedicating himself to just shooting, and it exhausted him physically. It exhausted his friendships. He was traveling like crazy. I mean, he was able to accomplish his shooting goals, which were very high, but at the same time, it cost him a lot. Like if you want to have any kind of high level of skill at something, you're going to have to, there's a price to be paid for that.
There's a big price. I mean, you have to
sure.
be a performer at that level in anything, whether we're going back to, the UFC, like we were alluding to a minute ago, or being in the military in certain units, or being a competitive shooter. Like, you have to be obsessive enough where you're willing to put other goals on hold.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And something I was thinking about just now when you were talking, it kind of ties into what we were saying a minute ago. And this is the flip side of the people that focus on just the 3 to 5 yards, 3 to 5 shots, 3 to 5 seconds, right? This is the other side. And I'm not saying it's not okay to do this, because it is. And I'm going to get into that in a second. But then you have guys that have never been a soldier or a policeman, and they're taking like advanced CQB classes and, all this other stuff. And if that is your hobby and your pursuit, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yep.
Right? If you're treating it like a martial artist doing Iaido or Kendo with a Japanese sword, and it's not really part of your life in terms of your day-to-day living. You're not walking around with a sword on your hip. It's like you're not walking around in a plate carrier if you're not a cop or a soldier, but it's your thing. That's okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to be kind of arrogant about that too, because I used to be like, well, you had time to serve, but I'm not like that anymore. I get it. Like, some people do it just for fun, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you don't need that to defend yourself and your family as a civilian. You don't need it. If you want it, that's cool. That's great. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. But if you're just trying to defend your family, you don't need advanced team CQB, because that's not what you're going to be doing.
Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure. And I think like we were talking about putting whatever your goals are into context, which is why, I mean, I ended up coming up with the armed parent / guardian, because I was taking all these trainings and was, I was already instructing. I was, starting to get pretty good at just shooting, right? And then I had my first child, and I was like, oh, this changes everything. If I'm out and about, I'm probably gonna have all the stuff with me. I'm probably gonna have my kid with me, so I have to start practicing one-handed. I realized that the gun I was carrying at the time, I could control it just fine with 2 hands. Could not control it very well with 1 hand only. My recoil recovery was not as good as I wanted to. So I was like, oh, I had to look at my equipment, I had to look at all my carry stuff. And what I realized as well, though, was that a lot of the instruction that I was seeking out was very specific to like executive protection kind of stuff. But again, that is an entirely different context to a mother with her children, right? I mean, yes, if I'm wearing a bulletproof vest or, plates, you are right. I want to throw myself between the bad guy and my principal, right? But I'm not walking around wearing plates and armor, and I'm not expecting to have to defend my loved one, because let's face it as well, once you dig into it even more, executive protection, if you are the person protecting a principal, the principal is always the target, almost always. Very, very seldom are you the target. You just so happen to there to protect them, right? It's the opposite when we're talking about defending our families, because our loved ones, especially children, thank goodness, right, are very rarely the targets of violent crime, because they don't have anything that your typical criminal wants. It does happen, but when it happens, it's usually very targeted because that person wanted that child. And very often is it just violent attacks, which again is good, right? So truly, you're mostly defending yourself with your children present, is how that ends up being. But when people just think of it in the context of executive protection, they get everything kind of backwards. And that was something I ran into a lot when I was even developing the curricula, was I would run into cops or military people or people who had a lot of executive protection background and even history, where they would hear what I was doing and they'd be like, that's all wrong. That's terrible. Cause in executive protection, I'm like, but that's not the context. That's not the problem that I'm trying to solve here. Um, and thankfully, though, like I've been able to have enough feedback from enough, very, very experienced trainers that have been able to, view my curricula and be like, oh no, you're on the right path here, because you are correct. Executive protection, though there are some principles that we can pull from that, that's not what you're actually trying to do here. You're trying to defend yourself while your loved ones happen to be with you, which is an entirely different problem as well that we often don't train for. You know how the training modality usually is, it's a target, you're training exclusively for the bad guy who happens to be out there. There's nobody around you. It's just you and the bad guy, and you just have to make very simple decisions about, what's in front of you. It gets a lot more complicated the more innocent people you add to that mix that you are taking responsibility for.
That class is actually the context I first heard about you in. Do you remember my friend Les Kismartoni? Les, you probably don't, but he was in that. He took that class.
Oh, I do remember him. I do think I remember him.
Yeah, he's now an IDPA national champion.
Yep.
And he's like a USPSA grandmaster. Yeah, Les was a really good guy. We were training partners for a while. But
we had a very interesting conversation. The reason I remember him so specifically now is we were having a very interesting conversation about when to start prepping the trigger when you're holding a loved one, because he prepped the trigger really, really early. I remember, because he's so fast. Like, he's so fast. He could get on the trigger really early. Well, when you're holding a loved one here, maybe you can't. Just a little
bit longer. Yeah.
And he was like, "Oh, I hadn't thought about that." So we had a really, really interesting conversation about trigger finger discipline with him.
Yeah, so. He raved about the class, actually. Like, he came back and we talked about a lot of the stuff for a while. And that's the first context I ever heard your name in, was him going to that class. He and I were training partners at the time for USPSA. So that class is something that interests me, and I'm glad you talked about it, because I was going to ask you about it. Like, so my son is grown now. He's out of the house. Mm-hmm. We talked about that before we started recording. But I distinctly remember, and I never had to draw my gun while my son was with me, but I lived in Chicago with my son, and I was a cop. There were a couple times where my hand was on my gun and I had my son with me, because somebody was begging for money and I didn't know if they were going to try to mug me or, whatever. And I've got my kid with me, so I want to keep him safe. And I remember the first time that happened, it only happened a couple times. The first time that happened, doing like a deep, like Einsteinian thought experiment, deep dive into what should I do if this happens or that happens, thinking about that particular context, because I had actually done executive protection work as a cop and as a soldier in SF. And, I'd been to combat, I'd been a cop in Chicago, but I'd never thought about it in the context you're talking about right now, until I actually thought I was going to have to. And I didn't have to, thank God, like I said, because my son was with me. But I remember thinking that I really had to think about this in case it ever actually did happen, because my instincts weren't matching how I needed to apply the principles in that context. Like, I'm a big believer that the principles of conflict are universal, right? Any kind of fighting is on a principle-based level the same as any other kind of fighting. But how you apply those principles technically and tactically varies widely based on the context. And this was something that I'd never had to think about. So, like, the things you're bringing up and you're talking about are resonating with me. I'm remembering having that kind of conversation with myself, God knows how many years ago it was now. And I think there aren't enough training courses to look into contexts like that are very highly probable to happen,
Mhm.
as a citizen with a gun, but aren't really trained for.
Mhm.
You know, like in my applications class, I do a lot of stuff that has to do with target discrimination because that's a very real thing, right?
Yeah.
And you know, you could walk into an active shooter incident and wind up having to pull your gun, and there's people running everywhere. You've got to be able to distinguish where to put your rounds, you know, and that stuff is important. But I'm by no means the only one doing that. Like that's in a lot of classes now. But I don't really know if anybody else is doing the kind of thing you're talking about for parents. And I think it's really a good concept.
I'm not aware of anybody. Since I've started teaching I've heard of a few. I mean, I know that at one point in time, I believe Tatiana Whitlock had a few things that like videos. I don't think she was doing a class. At least I'm not aware of it. She may have been. But I do remember same feeling that way. Because like I said, everything that I ever sought as far as training always came from a question, and I always sought out training, and I was always able to find it. But with this particular issue, I started seeking out training, and there was nothing, and I was kind of frustrated because, like you said, my instincts, I was starting to see probably are not all that solid either. And there were two experiences that I had that really illustrated for me how parental instinct isn't shouldn't be. I mean, let's face it. Shooting and all the tactics, all that kind of stuff. These are learned skills, right? Our instincts in a lot of this is not very helpful, right?
Well, it's based on a context that no longer exists. It's based on
Yeah, exactly.
a level of civilization and a threat that we are no longer going to encounter in that context.
Exactly. And I remember Greg Ellifritz wrote an article because he had conducted a force on force. He was the facilitator, and they had a child actor out there, and this, I think he was like 9 or 10 years old, and they had participants. They were like, okay, this is your kid, or this is your, niece, nephew, whatever, like, but now you are responsible for this kid. And he was not giving any kind of an answer. He was writing an after action of like, this is just what I observed, right? And I think, I can't remember what the exact numbers were, but the vast majority of participants collected once the incident started, whatever it happened to develop to be. The vast majority of the participants collected the child to them to protect them, and then if bullets ended up flying, the kid got shot a lot, like a lot. And the question he was asking was, is our parental instinct to collect our children to us helpful or hurtful? That's all he was asking. He wasn't trying to provide an answer. He was just like, this is what I observed. And then later on, I went to the tactical conference, and I was involved in one of Craig Douglas's experiential learning laboratories. And in this particular, those are completely blind scenarios. You walk in, the scenario, it's like, this is the very basic scenario, and go. And then everything develops. You have no idea what's going to happen. I was an EMT at the time, and my initial like intro to the scenario is my task was to go out to the parking lot and get in my car and drive away, right? And this woman runs up to me with a baby in her hands going, help me, my baby's not breathing. I'm an EMT. I am going to absolutely help in that situation. So, and that's something Craig Douglas always says. He's like, don't try and game it, play it the way that you actually would in real life. And I'm like, there's absolutely no universe where I'm not going to help a mother with a choking baby. So as soon as I take this baby in my arms to start doing an assessment, then all of a sudden somebody else comes into the scenario, and it's abusive. I'm in the middle of this, him yelling at her, all this kind of stuff. I won't go into extreme details what happened, but at some point in time, I end up cradling baby in my arms, drawing one-handed. I actually pressed out with both hands, and the term full ISO baby became a thing because the baby is literally like laying across my forearms while I'm shooting. I shot really well though. I did 3 to the chest, 1 to the head. It was amazing shots. And then like the mom ends up turning on me. It was chaos. It was absolute chaos. But I remember leaving that scenario feeling awful, like feeling like I had failed miserably. And I walked out into the hallway and I was just beating myself up. And Greg Elliferts came out and he saw me and he was like, what's on your mind? And I'm like, I feel like I just did terribly. And he's like, well, walk me through, like, walk me through what happened. And I was like, well, this is what happened, and this and this and this. And he's like, well, he goes, you didn't get shot. The baby didn't get shot. The person who needed to get shot got shot. Seems like a win to me. And I thought about it and I was like, I guess he's right. But like, why do I feel so bad about this? Like, why in my gut do I feel like I failed? So I went back in, because after you go through this scenario, you can go back in and observe. And I remember watching just scenario after scenario after scenario where the kid would get shot. I mean, the kid was getting shot so much. Like as soon as people had them, like bullets would be exchanged, or they'd decide that, the dad would take the baby, or and they would decide the dad needed to get shot. They would just shoot at the dad. The kid would get lit up. And I'm like, as soon as you introduce this little innocent life into this middle of this thing, it is chaos. And I'm like, there, I remember telling Kathy Jackson at one point in time, Kathy, there needs to be a class. And she said to me, well, Melody, if not you, then who? She's like, because I don't know anybody else who's put as much thinking and as much training and as much time into this issue as you have. And Kathy Jackson is the reason that the Armed Parent exists today, because of that challenge. Because you're right, like there are so many different questions that come up with this kind of scenario that are entirely unique. They are not executive protection issues. They are not single responder issues. They are not team issues, because your 2-year-old is not your team member. Right. And so they are unique, but in the last place you want to have to deal with them is in the moment, because it's a lot harder than to come up with the right solutions.
I used to play games with my son when he was very young. If we were in the car and I said down, his job was to get out of his seatbelt and to get in a fetal position in the floorboard in the back seat. If I said down in the house, he was to run into the basement and hide between the refrigerator and the brick wall.
That'd be a good place.
And so I had a few of these little games I would play with him. And he was very young. He had no idea this was like, what if I was a very active cop, right? What if I get home invaded by somebody that I've locked up, right?
Yeah.
Or I'm driving a car in Chicago, I could get carjacked with my son in the car. What do I tell him to do? And I try to think of the safest places I could put him and have him put himself in those places automatically as a trained response, so that I could worry about dealing with whoever the aggressor was, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, and obviously I did that probably because of my military background, because it's very similar to the way we do a lot of things, right? We come up with immediate action drills and we do them over and over again, so they become a trained response. But I think that that's the kind of thing that people need to think about, and it's too late to think about it in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Like you need to war game this stuff out. And I think it doesn't mean you're being paranoid or that all you're thinking about is danger. It's just like a little game you play, the what if game. What if this happens? What do I do?
I'll take it one step further. I think if you carry around innocent people on a regular basis, it is your responsibility. Because, and to some degree, there's only so much you can plan for, right? It's kind of like the 3-body problem, right? If you've got 3 things orbiting around each other, you can only predict their movement so far. And, and I think the same comes, like you can maybe, especially if you're in a team environment where you've got 2 adults who understand their role, they're going to do, but when you're talking about kids, obviously they can forget, they can, have a bad day, they can be scared, all those kinds of things. But once you get more than like 2-3 kids, 2-3 people that are not part of your team, in the sense that they are not choosing to be active participants with you. And, a great example of this is like the other day I stopped to get gas, and my son, who's 16, is like, I'm going to go in and get milk. And I'm like, okay, you go get milk. And my daughter's like, I'm going to do, each person starts to automatically move individually. And like you were talking about before, there are principles that you can kind of be like, okay, these are the principles that we're going to go through, because the environment's going to be changing all the time. And you cannot possibly war game every single situation when it comes to dealing with like loved ones and non-combatives in situations like that. But you absolutely should. I think if you are carrying a gun around innocent people that you are taking responsibility for, it is your responsibility to at least be thinking about some of the principles of, and some of the big ones for me are like angles of fire, making sure that you are getting your loved ones out of the angles of fire as much as humanly possible. Movement, I believe, becomes much more important because you might find yourself moving around people that, for they're completely innocent, your own children. There's a video, we show a lot of different videos in our classroom portion. One great video that we showed was gas station kind of scenario. Dad has 12-year-old little girl. I think she's coming either out of the gas station or she's going into the gas station. Either way, person behind her starts a fight with the dad at the gas pump, and they're literally exchanging gunfire over top of the head of this 12-year-old little girl who's like looking back and forth between them, like, what's going on, And at some point in time, that may just be the brakes, right? Like if something happens, you might not have time to be like, well, I guess we have to time out, bad guy. We need to move this over here because there's innocent people over here. But as much as possible, if I have the option to move, take a different angle, I can at least be thinking about that, right? One thing we did get wrong when we first started addressing the problem, excuse me, I'm getting over a cold, was initially we had our priority of, okay, we don't want our loved ones to get injured. We don't want our loved ones to get shot. So we're going to try and get our loved ones out of the fight as soon as possible. Like that's going to be our priority. And when we put that in force and we tested it, everybody died. We got shot. The kids got shot. It was a mess. And we realized that we were prioritizing the wrong thing. We needed to prioritize ending the fight.
Yep.
And making as quick and as accurate hits on target as possible. And then if you had the option to do any of these other administrative things like move, get your child out of the fight, that kind of stuff, that's awesome. Those are tasks, not priorities. And if you did not have time to do those things, then you just had to deal with what you had to deal with. And putting that in force on force, we had a much, much higher success rate for everybody. And we're like, oh, okay, yay, we I don't want to say we discovered anything new because that's been the philosophy of ending fights for as long as possible. But hey, we tried it.
Well, and I think yes, it's a very basic statement, but it's also a very profound one because as parents, like you said, our instinct is going to be to take care of our children.
Oh, for sure.
That's a good instinct to have. I mean, it ensures the survival of the species. I think it was Heinlein that said all true ethics come from the survival of the species.
I like it.
But it's really true. I mean, it really is. It's why women and children first. That's why the kids come before you, because they are the next generation of the species. They should matter more to you than you matter to you. But
it's hard to answer or at least to even be thinking about things like Chris talks about it, the idea that if your child, like let's say you're in a violent encounter and the first opportunity you have to realize you're in violence is maybe your kid catches a bullet. And he's like, do you have the mental fortitude to step over the screaming body of your child to end the fight before you come back and treat them? Like, I would say that's a very hard question to ask a parent, but that might be what is required of you. And if you're getting distracted by the chaos of the moment, which no one could blame you for, right? Like, no one would ever blame someone to be like, your child was injured and so you stopped to help them, and that compounded the problem. But even the thought of thinking about that beforehand can dramatically improve the chances that you're going to make the correct call in that situation just by thinking about it.
So one of the first things they teach medics in any of the special operations units is that there's no medicine in a gunfight, right? And that's because, they're trained to keep the rest of us alive. So their first instinct is to, if we get shot, is to take care of us. But they can't, because the gunfight's still going on. And I think that, as hard as it is as a parent, I think you're completely correct. I mean, I think you've got to finish the fight, because until you finish the fight, you're no good to your son or your daughter, because the fight's still going on.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah, no, I wish I'd been able to take the class. I didn't even know Les was going to it, but after he'd already gone to it. But like I said, he raved about it. And I've always liked that concept. And I think that that's the kind of thing that, not just this instance, but we should be paying more attention to things like the active shooter in the food court. I mean, things, yes, they're outliers, but in modern society, unfortunately, they happen often enough that you could be the person that's in that situation. And there's a whole lot of variables there that they're not in a one-on-one gunfight. It's a completely different animal,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of decision-making that has to be done. And
I think
like
decision
you said,
making truly is I mean, I remember having a conversation with Claude Warner when I was talking about my basic pistol class, because I do have I say basic, my fundamental pistols class. And, my conversation with him was basically, most gun classes, especially your fundamental gun classes that are trying to prepare people to eventually either carry a gun or have a gun for home defense, either one, right? Beyond just plain target shooting, right? Are not getting people making decisions fast enough. They're telling people, this is what a gun is, this is how you shoot. But I've been to classes, and I'm sure you've been to classes as well, where the student does not make an independent decision the entire class. They don't make the decision about when to load their magazines, how many rounds to load into their magazines, when to drop. They're making no independent decisions. They go through that entire class and exit and graduate and get a carry permit without having made a single decision for themselves. And I think that's wrong. I think that's wrong if you are trying to teach people how to make decisions, life and death decisions, when it comes to firearms. I strongly believe that the best thing that you can do for anybody who is being prepared to carry or use a firearm potentially for self-defense is get them making decisions with guns in their hands as soon as you can responsibly do so.
And I think I'm going to go back to when I was talking about, the competition versus the tactical side a minute ago, because I'm going to say something that is true about training like a competitor to carry a gun for self-defense. The ability to shoot at a subconscious level of competence is essential for people to be able to make good decisions under stress. And I'm not saying that you're incorrect about get them doing decision making early on. Absolutely. But I think that's one of the reasons why you need that almost over-prepared level of skill, like almost more skill than you actually will need, you're ever likely to need as a civilian. Mm-hmm. But if you have that kind of over-prepared level of skill, that what does Carl call it? Automaticity, where everything is just, it just happens. Like, I think I've got to shoot this target and the target gets shot, right? That's what you need, because then that frees up your conscious mind to go, okay, who are the people running around that are bystanders and I need to be careful of? Where is my son? Where are the exits? Is there more than one shooter? Are the police coming and I still have a gun in my hand? All of those big ticket decisions you need to make can't be made if I'm going front sight, squeeze the trigger in my head.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Or they're more difficult to be made. There's going to be a lag for sure.
Yes. Yeah.
I would not go so far as to say they cannot be made, because I think they do get made a
Maybe
lot.
can't get made efficiently. How about that?
Yeah, I think that's
Optimally.
fair.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because we do see, people with very little training making good decisions. And my favorite one, I think Tom Givens would show it, where it was a robbery, I think in a casino, and this little old guy with like a little revolver gets it out, and he's got this little like duck arm, and he just and I mean, he gets, I think it's like 5 shots, 5 hits kind of a thing. And his skill is not USPSA Grandmaster skill, but he made a decision, he made a plan, he executed it. And I think there are lots of people, because you talked about it when we first started, that I think everybody kind of goes through this progression of like, if you're not training this way, you're not doing this kind of training, you're not carrying this gear, you're not taking this seriously, right? And then once you get kind of over that hill and you realize like, oh wait, there's a lot of people who aren't like me and have a different context than me. That doesn't mean they're not taking it seriously. And there are people who I think don't make training their life. They get a decent amount of skill, and then what they need to focus on is making good decisions. And what level of automaticity do they need? I don't think that's an answerable question, because I think it is so unique to each individual. Do you get what I'm saying? Like,
No, I do. And I
I
think
do agree. I do agree 100% that the more complex the decisions you need to make, the more automaticity you are going to need to have.
yeah,
Because
but I also don't disagree with you. And actually, I'm thinking about another point that I wasn't thinking about a second ago, that I think is really this is valuable for people that maybe aren't going to be chasing the dragon for firearm skill, but they're going to carry a gun. The ability to make decisions under stress is transferable between different situations.
yes,
So if you have done like a combat sport or a martial art, or you've put yourself in something, I mean, it could be something like, and I've never snowboarded, but I would imagine snowboarding would be the same thing, where you're making decisions going 80 miles an hour, right? Motocross, right?
here rock
Making
climbing is a good one for that too, like decisions
probably,
under
yeah.
stress.
But I think that, and it's not 100% transferable from one type of stress to another. Like stress inoculation is specific. But I do believe there's a general level of stress inoculation you get, especially if you've done a variety of things where you put yourself in that position. And I think that some people, I think it's like every other skill, there's also a genetic component. Some people are just good at it.
Yes, I do. And I've seen that play out in my own life. I never really knew how well I was under stress. And that was that was an answer I wanted for myself, right? Because I'm like, hey, this might be really stressful. And I decided I wanted to become an EMT for a couple of different reasons. One, I wanted to know because I was teaching firearms, I was going to all these firearms classes. I wanted to know what to do should something happen on a range, whether that be a firearms incident or just a medical incident, right? Because people get stung by bees, people have heart attacks, people have asthma. So I went ahead and did got my EMT-B, and then started running EMS in a hospital and on ambulance. And I realized that I actually am I'm pretty calm under stress. I am not the person who's running towards things. I am the person who will sit back for a little bit and go, what's going on? Now, that could be good in certain circumstances. That could be bad in certain circumstances. And ideally, you have a team of people, right? You got the people who are going to be the ones who like, nope, we need to go right now. We need to do this thing. But then you've got the people who go, wait, don't run in there just yet. You see that wire hanging over there? Let's check and see if that one's live first. So it takes all types of people. But I something that I always kind of saw as a weakness of mine, which was this little bit of hesitation, this little bit of reluctance, ended up being a powerhouse because it allowed me to sit back and be like, let's form a plan first. In other instances, though, it's a hindrance because sometimes I don't act as quickly as I would like to. However, it provides a more opportunity to make good decision. And working within that kind of like, okay, how do I push myself to have a little bit more ready, available, I guess, responses rather than hesitating to make the right decision. And I think that largely comes from experience, you know?
I think it's like the old question of nature versus nurture.
Yeah.
Because the answer is yes.
The answer is yes. It's all of it. It's all the above.
But so you touched on something that I wanted to go back to because I think it's really good and it's really important. So I talk a lot in my classes about making the principles of technique apply to you. Like my grip, I'm basically the missing link. Like I'll hold my hand up for the camera. This is not a human hand. This thumb doesn't oppose. I'm pretty much an orangutan, right? So my grip is going to be drastically different than my wife's grip, who she has little Smurfette hands. They're very petite. They're very cute. They like fit in my palm, right? So she's got very good recoil control, but her grip looks nothing like mine, nor should it, because our bodies are different and our psychology is different. Mm-hmm. That also factors into how you do physical skills. Your mind plays a big part of this, right? You know, look at like top martial artists, look at like top UFC fighters. Even people that have similar builds may have drastically different styles of fighting because their psychology is different. And knowing your psychology and the strengths and weaknesses enables you to make the right choices and take the right actions under stress. And I think that's important. Like I tend to be the run to the gunfire guy. And I had to learn in my careers to temper that and learn when it was appropriate to sit back and evaluate a little more before I did it. So I had to work on my weakness. Whereas it sounds like you're more the sit back and kind of pay attention for a minute and formulate a plan. And you may have to temper that with knowing, okay, now it's just time to go. Mm-hmm. Right. But if we're not self-aware, if we don't have this objective self-evaluation of our strengths and our weaknesses, and I don't even want to call it that, it's more our styles. How about that? It's not really a strength or a weakness. It's just your personal style. If you don't know your physical style or your psychological style, you don't know what you need to work on to make yourself more well-rounded and more effective. And I think that's a really powerful observation that more people should pay attention to.
Or even just how you show up. Now, something I did learn about myself, kind of surprisingly, you get my kids involved, I switch very quickly. So I did another force on force training event with a group, and they had another like child actor kind of come in and play. And the scenario was you went to the bathroom and you came out, and when you came out, you just basically are watching this person walk away with your child, right?
Yeah, that's not happening.
And I was the only participant who came out of the bathroom. I called for, because there were other, and they put it on very well in the sense they had other actors. So you actually had to like look through kind of a crowd a little bit to see. And I called out the name of, my child, and I saw her. And I saw the back of her head, and I noticed that she was with someone. And I kind of had this moment of like, what's going on? I looked down, saw that he was holding her hand. And then I also saw in his other hand that he had a knife. And I'm like, oh, I know the answer to this question. So I ended up shooting him in the back of the head, closing distance, and then hooked around him and shot him, I think, 2 more times on the way down. And then, it was a very aggressive response. But that's when I also realized, like, oh, there's some things that I don't play with, like, and it was kind of funny because when they were doing the debrief on that one, they were like, why didn't you tell him to drop the knife? Why didn't why didn't you verbally engage with them? I was like, 'cause I didn't need to. There's no, like, I know the answer to this question, and there's no jury on. And even if there was something there that could be articulated that was illegal, because there wasn't, there are certain things I'm willing to exchange rather, you know what I mean? Like like you said, there's no world in where I'm going to let somebody take my child away, at knife point. Um, and that's an exchange that I'm going to stop that. Like, I'm going to stop that by any means necessary. And I have a strong legal defense for my actions. And I feel like I would have gotten, been able to articulate that fairly well, even though people were like, you didn't even verbally engage. I'm like, I really don't feel like I needed to. Um, and I think that too, because when we talk about decision making, one of the most common things I get in my classes, and you probably have them in yours as well, is when we're talking about things like scenarios or deciding to make good decisions, a lot of people just do not know what they can do, like what their options are under the law. And so that hesitation of like, well, what do I do, is hampered quite a bit by not knowing what they can do. Um, and as
I,
long as you have a basic idea, like, you have a lot more freedom than you think you do in a lot of situations. Like when it's time to go, the law is very pro go.
I think too that, and this is an issue that kind of goes back and dovetails a lot of the stuff we've been talking about. People haven't done the math ahead of time.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
And some of that is what you're talking about, just knowing the legalities. And if this happens, I can do this. If A, then B, right? That's part of it. But then I think another part of it is, and this doesn't apply to everyone, for better or worse, it never really applied to me. I was always, I was a cop and a soldier from a young age. I was always very aggressive. Like I didn't have a problem doing the hard thing, right? But not everybody has my experience, and nor should they. And they're probably a lot nicer than I am as a result of it, to be quite honest, right? So for people that are perhaps a little further removed from the savage than I am, that aren't quite the missing link than I am, they need to do that math ahead of time so they won't hesitate out of empathy.
Yes. Yes.
And they've got to understand that if you use deadly force legally, it was not truly your decision.
Mm-hmm.
Because that other person could have done any myriad of other things and gone home alive or gone to jail alive or, yep, one or the other, right? But they chose to do this. They chose to grab your kid with a knife in their hand. They chose to pull a gun on you and try to take your car away. They chose these things. And I think that for people that struggle with the idea of using lethal force from, either a moral standpoint or perhaps a religious one, or just the natural innate human tendency to not want to hurt others, which is a good thing, right? That means you're a good person.
Mm-hmm.
It means you're one of the good guys. But you've got to understand that it wasn't your choice. It was their choice that caused you to use lethal force. And I also think that if people do that math ahead of time, they won't have the adverse psychological effects from using violence on someone else. Because they're going to understand that it wasn't them. They were forced to do it by the other person.
Well, and I think we do also, and I think this is unfortunate. I think we unfortunately live in a time where there's a lot of empathy, misplaced empathy. I agree with you. I think that empathizing with other human beings that are struggling in other walks of life and is a marker of a good quality and a good quality to foster in a society. But there is a line at which it needs to stop. And yes, that is when, kind of like what you're talking about, if somebody is making a choice that is putting other people in fear of their life and or limb, which is the definition of deadly force, that's where I stop empathizing with you, because you are making, like, exactly, I like the way that you articulated, like, this is your choice. These are the natural consequences for your actions. And I just happen to be the tool that is delivering them at that point. Like, you made this choice. And I do appreciate that the law even provides for that in cases of collateral damage.
Yep.
And that's something that I talk about in all of my classes as well. Like, if you tried to defend somebody, who, like your child or something, and you missed and shot somebody else, legally, you are not held responsible for that as long as you are acting within, as long as the shoot was justified. You would not, the law recognizes that you would not be shooting if this person were not committing this felony. And so whatever collateral damage happened isn't on you, it's on them, the person who started this felony or felonious assault or whatever it happened to be. And of course there's more to that. So as your listeners, I'm sure they're aware of looking out current laws in their states and making sure that they have knowledge about what is legal and what isn't. But
well, in
part,
many states, you can even charge an offender for his accomplice getting killed.
Yep, absolutely.
Because he created that situation by committing the crime.
And I think that even just knowing that, I like what you said as well about that can help protect people after the fact from post-traumatic stress. And I think as well, and that's something that I have thought about quite a bit, like there are hard decisions. So one of the hard decisions that we talk about in The Armed Parent that I've thought about significantly is, and my kids are older now, so I don't have to worry about it so much now, but when they were little, and it was possible to like pick them up and run with them, right? It was a thought exercise of mine, and I talked about it with my husband about, okay, if somebody has one of my children and he is holding them kind of like not hostage, but also as a human shield and running away from them, am I willing to make that shot knowing full well I could potentially hit my own child? And in talking with my husband, we both sat down and gave each other permission to make the shot. And we said, like, and my thought was always, I'm an EMT, right? I would rather make the shot and potentially, I would rather my child die in my arms with me trying to save them than die 3 days later being raped or murdered, and that is a hard decision to make beforehand. And that is a sobering decision to make beforehand. Now, we do teach in the class, there are ways to make that shot that make it less likely that you are going to, potentially hit and injure your own child. But the ultimate decision there is my child does not leave with another human being forcibly, period, full stop. Now, I'm certainly not going to do anything negligent, but that's the bottom line there. That's the line that will not be crossed. Just like for my own personal self, you will not move me against my, to another crime scene, right? Like nobody's going to put a gun to my head and say, get in the car and be like, all right, well then you're just going to have to shoot me. Because otherwise we are going to have a fight to the death right here, right now. I will not be moved to a secondary location. And having those thoughts beforehand and making those decisions beforehand can really help you then decide how you're going to make your stand, should you need to make your stand. Because
it filters into your tactics too.
Yes.
Right? So like I'll use an example from SWAT. Multiple incidents when I was in SWAT, there were people we were not going to let get loose into the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
Armed people that were unstable, that we weren't going to let them get into, we're talking like a big city neighborhood, thousands of people. They weren't going to be running around in the neighborhood. If they went beyond a certain point, they were getting shot. And it's a decision you make ahead of time. But what does that then inform? Where am I going to place my people?
Yep.
What are their sectors of fire? What are their movements? What are their things to do? What are their options if this happens or that happens? That all stems from that initial decision. And I think you and your husband giving yourself that permission then opened up a whole, well, if this happens, I'm doing this. If this happens, I'm doing this. Because you'd already made the doctrine decision.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about doctrine, tactics, and techniques, right?
Yeah.
So the tactic would be shooting them because they're holding your son. But the doctrine is, I'm not letting my son leave with another person to get tortured.
Yep. For sure. And to your point, like if they're running towards a getaway vehicle, because we already talked about the legalities and stuff, will I shoot the getaway driver? You better believe it. If it hinders their ability to leave and it is within the legalities to do so. And I mean, I once was talking about that in class, and I was like, hey, here's the scenario. Somebody, because we showed a lot of videos just to kind of get people thinking about this, where yeah, it was like getaway driver in vehicle. Someone gets out of the vehicle, snatches like a 4-year-old kid and is running towards the vehicle. And the mom's like trying to basically claw her way into the vehicle while the vehicle is driving away. And I was like, all right, class, what are your potential responses here? And everyone's like, this. I was like, who wants to, I was like, who decides to shoot the getaway driver? And everyone's like, can we do that? I'm like, yes, you absolutely can. They are part of this felonious situation. They are just as much kidnapping your child as the person who actually snatched your child. And without the getaway driver, the car's not going to be going a whole lot. Like, that's a tactic that you can use. And thinking outside of the whole, or thinking of the holistic problem instead of just the players in there, can help you come, because the ultimate goal, like we were talking about, is like this person is not leaving with my child. How do we best accomplish that? And then how does that color our tactics? And being creative with that within the scope of what the problem you're trying to solve. I think that a lot of times that creativity, and as long as you start with a premise, can then really start to flow.
And I think too, I've seen this in law enforcement in the last 10 years or so, right? Maybe a little longer than that. It started a little earlier than that. Lack of support from public officials and from bosses on the police department has made a lot of cops, especially these days, hesitant to do something they are well within their legal and policy ability to do.
Yep.
And hesitant for good reasons, to be honest, right?
Oh, 100%.
But I think that's also bled over to citizens who carry a gun.
Mm-hmm.
And like something that, and I can tell you would agree with this from the things you said. And actually, you pretty much said this a minute ago anyway. There are certain things that I'm going to do to protect the people I love that I will believe to be legal in the moment. And if a court doesn't agree with me, I still protected the people I loved. And that's just the way it is. Like, I'm not going to not do what's right in the moment because I'm worried about what's going to happen after the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you have to be prepared for the fight after the fight, right? That's an absolute thing. But just like you can't tend to your son's wounds while you're still in the gunfight, I can't start the second fight till the first fight's over.
Mm-hmm.
And people lose sight of that in the current political climate, I think.
They do. And I think that there's a lot, because there is such a culture, because I don't think it's really based in reality as much as people claim it is. I think it's more of a cultural mindset that is kind of mistrustful, because there used to be a culture that the law enforcement, military were the good guys, right? Like, they even if they did something that was maybe questionable, we had faith that they were acting in attempts to do ultimately the right thing. And the culture now has actually shifted quite a bit, that, you've got the all cops are bastards or whatever, which I think is ridiculous. And this culture that just everybody out there who is involved in law enforcement at their core is somehow evil, or they are wanting so desperately they're just trigger happy. They can't wait to do the wrong, they're just looking for an excuse, right? So that culture has shifted, and to some degree, a lot of times that bleeds over into people who then carry guns, right? Oh, you just want to be a cop, which right now is not necessarily seen as a good thing, right? And so in a lot of places, I still am very pro law enforcement. And so having that mindset could then make people feel very, I'm going to say gun shy. One, gun shy is good. In general, I think that people should be more hesitant to use firearms in certain circumstances. I think you and I both know of people, like, when you talk to them, they're like, well, I just shoot him. Why just shoot him? Why just shoot him? It's like, oh man, no, you need to calm down a little bit. But then there's the other side of gun shy, where it's like, no, these are circumstances where do absolutely where a firearm is not only a good idea, may actually end up being required. And you hesitating to make that decision and that action is potentially going to, that's, you're likely going to lose this fight ultimately, and your life because of it. And that becomes very difficult when the political climate is so anti-fire. And there are different places in the country, as you know, you live down in Texas. There are places where, you know, people have encounters down in Texas where they're like, good job, you got the scum off the streets, right? But then you go to some place like Portland, Oregon, you'd go to prison. You know, so even here in the United States, and I know there are people who will not travel places with a gun because they're like, I don't even want to risk having to use my gun and then needing it and then losing the secondary fight, even if I did the right thing.
See, I have so many thoughts on this. One is that, okay, so I'm going to just say, like, a general perspective I have noticed in people that have participated in a lot of violence at a high level, right? And I'm going to include myself in that category. I'm not saying I've seen the most by any means, but I've seen a lot more than most people do, and I've done a lot more than most people. People that have participated in a lot of high level violence. By high level, I mean, like, you know, big events, right? Typically both never want to be in those situations again and will not hesitate if they find themselves in those situations. And it's the same reason for both feelings, right? One is that I know how things can go south. No matter how good I am, no matter how good a shot I am, no matter how good a martial artist I am, all it takes is one random thing for me to lose that fight. So I want to avoid the fight if at all possible, right? But then the flip side of that is because of the same reason. If the fight happens, it's going to be over. Like, you know, when I was younger, I was far more merciful in that sort of situation than I was by the end of my career, right? Because I was kind of comfortably arrogant in my own skill. And then as I got older, I was like, you know, skill doesn't always win the day.
Yeah. You can get lucky. Even a bad even a bad fighter can land a lucky punch.
Yeah. So I think that, like, people should cultivate that mindset, right? And don't even, I mean, yes, worry about the fight after the fight, but understand that, yeah, there are things that I can adopt into my training and my tactics that will help me win the fight after the fight. But I'm not fighting that fight yet.
Yep.
I've still got to fight this one. And I want to avoid it if at all possible, because it's just so much better if I do. Like, it's just, there is no outcome that is better for me having gotten in a gunfight that I could have avoided. Like, there's just not one, you know?
And to some degree, you have to get okay. I tell my kids this all the time. You know, I have a series that I'm writing for them. We can get into this later, but it's the things I want to teach my children. It's the intellectual will that I want to pass on to my children. And one of them is how to break rules. And the reason I wrote that was because I think when we think about rules, oftentimes we think about laws, we think about anything that's imposed to try and control our behavior. Not all rules are moral, not all rules are just. But you have to accept that, you know, if you have taken on a moral code or a principle, whatever that may be, and that could be like, I'm going to defend my family at all costs, period, full stop, right? And you're going to do that no matter what. And if that principle ends up conflicting with any rule at any time, and you choose to break it, then you are choosing the consequence of that. And you need to be comfortable with that ahead of time and just accept that these are my priorities, right? This is priority number one. And that comes with all the consequences that may incur under priority number one. And once you have accepted that, the prospect of fight number 2 is less daunting,
Yeah.
because you're like, I've already accepted that this could come and I'm not surprised by it. And I have already accepted the consequences of that, no matter what they end up being. And I think some people are just not willing to play the mental game out, or, that far, where they're like, well, what if I lose on the path to this? Well, did you win this fight? Well, then you already won. Then fight 2, no matter what the outcome is. And I'm not saying that that's an insignificant fight, or that you should just be like, well, I guess I don't care. No, by all means, get the training that you need, get the experience you need, get the contacts you need and the people in your life that you need to, stack the deck in your favor to win that fight, and do everything you can within the boundaries of those rules to make sure that you are as justified as humanly possible, of course. But ultimately, the fight number 2, as long as I have succeeded with fight number 1, I'm accepting that whatever happens in fight number 2 is a consequence of that. And that's how it is.
It's triage, right? Like your EMT days. Decision making under stress is basically triage, no matter what the decision making is.
Yes.
What has to get handled now? What do I need to handle later? And what do I need to just forget about because I'm not going to be able to fix it?
For sure.
And an interesting little observation, and then we got to wrap it up because we're at like an hour and 40 minutes already. And it's been a good conversation. I definitely would like to have you on again if I can, because I think we have a lot more to talk about still.
I would love to. It's just fun. Yeah.
The training process for special forces, there's a very interesting thing about it. And both of these are simultaneously true at the same time. If you get caught cheating, especially on certain rules where cheating would be totally unethical, you will never be able to come back. There are also events that you have to complete and pass that you cannot pass following the rules. They're basically looking for the people with the ability to understand when it's okay to bend and break the rules and when it's not, when it's ethical, when it's not, and how to get away with it if you have to. And I always thought that was an interesting thing because I kind of saw that during the process. I was like, oh, I see what they're doing here. They're looking for a very specific kind of person, and for better or worse, that behavioral trait has followed me the rest of my life and probably will until the day I die.
Well, I think there is a significant amount of value to that, really, because it does show. And Chris and I, like I said, Chris and I have had significant conversations about that, and its power in even raising and teaching children, right? Yep. Like, he has a speech that he gives. He teaches us high school substitute in high school, and there is a speech that he gives his students when he first gets them about how to be a good insurgent. And he told it to me, and I was just like, I was laughing, but at the same time, I'm like, actually, that's pretty brilliant. He's basically like, I'm going to allow you, if you can get away with it under this line, and you're smarter than me and can get away with it, then good for you. And it's almost encouraged, like, be creative, make your own way underneath of this line. As long as you don't go above this line. But if you go above this line, I'm going to have to whack-a-mole you back down,
Well, it's a difference too. Yeah. Well, it's a difference too between like unethical and against the rules. Those are two totally different things.
They are very different things.
Sometimes they're both present at the same time, but they're two different qualities. And I think understanding that teaches you a lot about how to succeed in life and how to get things done, especially when things are really on the line, when it actually matters,
Yeah.
So real quick, tell everybody how to get a class with you, about your business, how to follow you on all the social media and all that other stuff.
Citizensdefenseresearch.com is our website. You can go there and there is a link. We do all of our signups through Eventbrite. So there is a link on the website, or you can just, honestly, it's easier to Google Citizens Defense Research and then just Eventbrite than try and find our Eventbrite page because of reasons. But if you just Google Citizens Defense Research Eventbrite, then you will see all of our classes. Any classes that we currently have are always going to be on Eventbrite. That's the first place we put them. So if you're like, well, do you have anything coming up? If it's not on Eventbrite, we don't have anything coming up for that. That we are on the socials. We are on Facebook. We are on Instagram. Not super active, as you know. You messaged me on Instagram. It took me a while to get back to you, but we do get back to people. You can also email us, info@citizensdefenseresearch.com, instructors. So if you have any just basic question about our classes, any of the instructors, you can just email info@citizensdefenseresearch.com.
I have really enjoyed the conversation. I think we've touched on everything from transhumanism to ethical issues to automaticity. So I'm pretty sure we got to do this again, because I think there's about 4 or 5 rabbit holes we left untouched that we're going to have to go down at least. So,
well, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for inviting me.
No, I've had a great time, and I definitely would like to schedule you again. So, hey, everybody out there, I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Definitely check out Citizens Defense Research. It's a bunch of good instructors teaching good things. Go and get yourself trained and get a little more prepared. You won't regret it. So, all right, everybody, I'll talk to everybody next time.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Way is in Training. Please come back again as we explore how training makes us better at our craft and better in our everyday lives. See all of you soon.